I'm Anthony Leeds. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to this episode, which is the first in our series where we're going to talk about eye disease. And today we're going to talk about macular degeneration. And with me I have Professor John Nolan, who leads a research team based in Waterford and has made major contributions which should in the future help us to address this very serious problem of macular degeneration. In the United Kingdom, well over 700,000 people are affected by it, and with an ageing population, not just in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, but also indeed across the entire globe, we're going to see more and more people affected by macular degeneration. John, thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps you could begin by explaining what is macular degeneration.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion today. So, as its name suggests, age-related macular degeneration is an age-related eye condition, and it's the leading cause of blindness in the Western world. And it affects the back of the eye, an area of the eye known as the retina, but particularly it affects the center part of the retina. So that's like if you think of the back of the eye as the part of the eye that receives light and sends a message to the brain, about 4% of that is called the macula. Within the macula, we have light-sensitive tissues that mediate and allow us to have about 90% of our vision. And in the healthy population, this is important because our vision is performing for us. But as we age, this part of the retina can get sick. And this is known as macular degeneration because the degeneration happens at the macula. And even though it's such a small area of the retina, it has a massive effect on our vision. So as patients with macular degeneration will be well aware of, they lose their entire central vision, they lose their quality of life. This is because losing your central vision has a massive effect on how we perform, on our ability to perceive loved ones' faces, on our ability to watch the television program. So it is a really catastrophic disease in terms of its impact on quality of life. And it is a problem and a growing problem, as we said, because we are living longer. So more and more people have this condition and our health systems are totally overwhelmed and people are greatly suffering with macular degeneration.
And of course, one of the problems is that the condition develops to a particular point before people become eligible for medical treatment, don't they? By which time it's very difficult to, you can't perhaps turn the clock back, but it can be treated and perhaps slowed down by medical treatment, but it would be much better to address it much earlier on, wouldn't it? Absolutely,
Tony. I mean, eye doctors, so we optometrists now and medical ophthalmologists as standard now look into the back of the eye. So from relatively young age, maybe 50, 60 years age on, you can start to see changes in the back of the eye. And these changes are the disease presenting itself. And we know in the UK, I think the data is there's about 10% of the population at age 70 have some form of macular degeneration. But you're absolutely right. What we currently do within our health care and health systems is we wait for that disease to develop at a significant level until it's suitable for a pharmaceutical treatment. And we know from our own data here in Ireland that we actually only look after, use medical treatment for about 0.3% of the people that have that condition because the disease has progressed in what we call neovascular, the wet form. And this is where patients will go to an eye doctor, a medical eye doctor, and he or she will inject what we call anti-VEGF therapy, which is basically just a molecule that reduces the production of blood vessels. So when the eye gets sick, we call this inflammation. It overproduces these unwanted blood vessels, and that really destroys the macula and therefore really destroys the vision. So that is a pharmaceutical treatment that is used. But you're right, the opportunity and what we should be doing in our health systems is looking at this disease earlier and making interventions earlier that we now know can help our patients.
Yeah. Now, what about the associations? Because some people are more at risk of developing macular degeneration. We know age is a factor. We know that smoking is a factor. What other things are factors that seem to increase risk?
Yes, so the established risk factors for age-related macular degeneration are age, as you say, genetics. So our familiar disposition, there's genetics, we know what they are, the complement factor, ARMS2. So these are the high risk genes. But basically the easy way to understand that is if you have a family history of macular degeneration, you're likely to have those genes and therefore you're higher risk of developing the condition. The other modifiable risk factor is cigarette smoking. And of course, thankfully, nowadays, less and less people are smoking cigarettes. But it's interestingly, of those 3 established risk factors, cigarette smoking is the only modifiable factor. Now, I would consider nutrition and maybe nutrition/lifestyle as the 4th established risk factor. So this is another modifiable, or maybe a better way to put it is optimizable risk factor, insofar as we now know with certain targeted nutrients that we can consume via diet and now via supplementation, we can enrich what we would call macular pigments, and these are protective pigments that live in the back of the eye. And I, in my first, nearly 25 years ago now in my PhD program, I actually measured macular pigment in the general population. And what I showed, Tony, was that individuals with the established risk factors, so those at high risk of developing the disease, had a deficiency in this pigment at the back of the eye. And this pigment is called macular pigment. And it's called macular pigment because it's a yellow pigment that is concentrated uniquely at the macula. And I've been studying that pigment now for over 2 decades because it's a nutritional pigment, therefore we can modify it, we can optimize it, we can enrich it. And we know if we do that, because of this pigment's antioxidant properties and its optical properties, it provides a wonderful benefit for those with macular degeneration, but most importantly, maybe in a preventative way, it stops people developing macular degeneration.
I think also, if I remember rightly, I've heard you say that even individuals who have normal vision can benefit from optimization of the levels in terms of their, for example, contrast sensitivity can be improved.
Absolutely correct. And we ran a major project here at the Southeast Technological University, and it was a project funded in 2011 by the European Research Council. And so this was a really super grant, if you like, that myself and my colleagues, we won. And we wanted to not just work with patients with macular degeneration, but we believed that by enriching these pigments, that we could enhance visual function for the general population. Mm-hmm. And one way that we measure an improvement in visual function for the general population is to measure contrast sensitivity. And that's important because, when I speak to optometrists, eye doctors across the world, I tell them that we should, in addition to doing acuities in the clinic, so acuities, your viewers and listeners will be familiar with going to an eye doctor and that they will have to sit in a chair and they'll look at black letters on a white background. And those letters are at 100% contrast. And all the doctor does is change the size of those letters. And the doctor will calculate your refraction from that and see if you need glasses, typically. And the point is, however, if you just think about this for a second, look around the world, look at the room that you're in currently, nothing is at 100% contrast. So it made sense to me that looking at visual function, so how good or bad my vision is, there should be other ways we can measure this. And contrast sensitivity is a brilliant measure. It is essentially a measure of vision to measure the threshold of vision. So in other words, at what point do you not see a target anymore? And we know from wonderful work from Owsley and Sloan that the contrast sensitivity measure correlates with how a human being feels about his or her vision. And this is crucially important because even with disease patients, and when I say disease patients, that's macular degeneration, the first measure of vision to drop is contrast sensitivity. And looking at different environments, maybe pilots or military or the sporting environment, a measure of vision that really is important to their performance is that of contrast sensitivity.
Now, isn't one of the problems, though, that it's not been a routine investigation and It's perhaps a little bit challenging to introduce it into routine examination. Is that a problem?
The problem is time. The problem of introducing such technology as the assessment of contrast sensitivity is time. I would say that in the majority of visual function suites that are in the clinic setting, in the ophthalmology clinic or in the optometry clinic, they actually have contrast sensitivity capacity. I think the problem is time, and I suppose knowledge of the importance of this assessment, and why that can bring value to the doctor and to his or her patient. And you can do it very quickly. So if you think of a cycle per degree as a different size target. So we would typically measure at 6 cycles per degree, which is kind of a medium-sized target, and change the contrast. And you can do that in a couple of minutes, even in the clinic setting. And within a patient, over time, that measure is a very valuable measure for the doctor and for the patient.
Now, if we go back to the question of the visual pigments, those are available in plant foods, particularly. Can you explain where they might be obtainable among plant foods? And I know that you're concerned about the changing concentrations of some of them actually in industrially produced plant food products, that we're not getting as much as we should. And actually, where you've looked at populations, almost everybody doesn't have as much carotenoid in the samples that you take as they should have. That's my understanding, I think, of what you said in the past.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct again, Tony. Your own knowledge on this is very good, I have to say. I must say, to kind of address it, because there's many aspects to that point that you've just made. The first thing we should do is explain what a carotenoid is. A carotenoid is a plant-based pigment that's found in nature. There's over 700 carotenoids in nature. So when you look at colored fruits and vegetables, when you look at birds' feathers, when you look at fish skin, when you look at egg yolk, the natural colors that you see in our environment are because of carotenoids. What's really interesting is that we consume only about 50 of those. And these are fat soluble, which means that they're not water soluble, which means that if they want to go to target tissues like the eye and the brain, they have to go on a journey. So they must be encapsulated within the stomach. We call these micelles, and they go through the intestine wall, lymph system, blood system, and then they're past the blood-brain barrier, and we know that they're concentrated in the eye and the brain. And what's really interesting is that from the 50 carotenoids that we consume from a typical diet, 20 of them are in the blood, but only 3 of them make their way to the macula. So remember at the beginning, we spoke about the macula being so important for our vision. The reason why I'm studying macular pigments is that they're found in the macula and they're highly concentrated. So these are carotenoids called lutein, zeaxanthin, and a really special carotenoid called mesozeaxanthin. Now, and you rightly say that we have some challenges within that. And what I'm typically asked when I kind of lecture on this at scientific conferences is, can we just use food to deliver these nutrients? And sure, we should know what foods contain these really valuable carotenoids. They are leafy greens, colored fruits and vegetables, peppers, egg yolk. They will have a carotenoid typically called lutein. But in the eye, I mentioned another carotenoid, didn't I, called mesozeaxanthin. And what we know about mesozeaxanthin is it's the most powerful antioxidant of all of the carotenoids in the eye. But when it combines with lutein and zeaxanthin, it basically gives that light-sensitive tissue an extra protection. And what our studies have shown is that people at risk of macular degeneration have a dip in their pigment and a lack of mesozeaxanthin. So what we wanted to do was see, could we enrich this pigment by dietary interventions and or supplementations. So the first piece of information we have, again, you allude to, is that food is devolving. So the plants that we are consuming now, because they're crop selected, because we enhance the growing environment, they suppress the very valuable and beneficial carotenoids that are in the plants. So because the plants don't need them anymore when we make it easy for the plants to grow. So in other words, we're consuming lots of plants even if we're healthy, but we're not getting much micronutrients from those particular foods. So this is a challenge of our time that I believe is going to have a massive impact in the future. So what we had to do, Tony, and what was really, really, I suppose, the discoveries of our science, is that we were able to source the carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin. These are the three parts of the macular pigment jigsaw. And when we include the three parts of the macular pigment jigsaw, we were able to substantially rebuild the protective macular pigment. So in other words, by doing that, our patients, and those, of course, in the general population that enrich their macular pigments, are able to have a better antioxidant and a really valuable light filtering pigment at the back of the eye. And that's a point. So what is it doing there? It's like sunscreen at the back of the eye, but it's also sunscreen that has this optical property that it essentially removes the blue light. And if you think of the light spectrum, that's very important to do. The back of the eye has to receive what we call the visible light spectrum, and they're all the colors of the rainbow. But a problem within that is the short wavelength blue light, because it's high energy, it can damage the macula. But again, these pigments, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin, which form this jigsaw of macular pigment, this protective pigment, are able to filter out that short wavelength blue light. And in science, we call this reducing photooxidative stress. So oxidative stress, which is basically the attack of this kind of free radical, a free radical being, it's a molecule that's missing an electron, and it'll steal the electrons from the healthy cells. So in other words, again, I refer to the sunscreen effect. If we have enough of this pigment, we have enough of this protective antioxidant, we can protect our patient's vision, but most importantly, we can enhance our patient's vision. And we were really lucky, and in collaboration with the Howard Foundation UK and in partnership with Industrial Organica, this is where we source the carotenoids for our studies. And these are the same materials, formulation, if you like, that's been used successfully in our clinical trials. We were able to optimize the amount of carotenoid that we needed to rebuild the protective pigments. We were able to make sure that we had the mesozeaxanthin carotenoid present, and we tested that research question, as I said, in the CREST trial in the healthy population, but also, Tony, in those patients with age-related macular degeneration, in those patients who we believed, not just believed, that we measured had the early stages of the disease. And what you led with is there something we can and should do instead of letting everyone progress to the pharmaceutical treatment? And that's what we did. We took patients who had established disease, who would normally be just left for that disease to progress. And what we did was, using this 10-10-2 formula, this carotenoid formula with lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin, we were able to rebuild the protective macular pigment, and we enhanced their contrast sensitivity, and we enhanced their visual related quality of life. And it had a massive positive effect on their quality of life and their vision. And I suppose, Tony, I really enjoy having these type of conversations, and particularly with you, because you're so knowledgeable on the area. I mean, it's amazing that we've been able to do something within our science that we've seen in the clinic, that we've seen already with patients, have such a beneficial effect. And that's what we told the European government we would do. I remember my conclusion for that grant. I said we can enhance vision for the people of today's world while protecting against age-related blindness into the future. And I said we must do that if we are to impact positively on this disease, which is ultimately a terrible disease, and it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything about it.
So the next question, I suppose, is what are the next steps? Because this is not a routine part of practice. I know that there are one or two countries in the world where people are taking more interest than others. You've done an enormous amount of work within the Republic of Ireland, but what are the next steps in terms of moving this into being considered as an intervention? What about the health economics aspects of this, for example, when we consider the actual costs against the benefits?
we can look at the Republic of Ireland as a very unique petri dish, if you like, to explain that, because we have 5 million people here, and we had the value of doing work as part of the Irish longitudinal study on aging, and within that we were able to calculate the number of people that had age-related macular degeneration, and extrapolating from our own published studies and that of others, including work done in the US, we were able to calculate the cost and the value cost, if you like, of providing these supplements within those trials. And then we kind of model that back to if we were to do that in a population. And long story short, this is something that's very affordable. You know, these come from plants, these come from marigold, we call them cempasúchil in Mexico. And I believe that everyone over a certain age, at least, should be provided with these carotenoids. And our cost-benefit analysis demonstrated that we would save, for example, the Irish government over a 5 million period, over 300 million in terms of the cost to what's going on. So it's a no-brainer in terms of, you know, making these available. I would say, and you are right, that this is not part of mainstream. It is not considered, if you like, a standard of care. However, in the Republic of Ireland, again, as our example, we've seen, I would predict and propose here, that because of our education in this area and because of what the studies have clearly shown, in the Republic of Ireland, every doctor and their patient now is proactive in terms of talking about nutrition and, you know, using a nutritional supplement that has been tested, that has a supplement certified quality program connected to it. So, you know, everybody in Ireland that is well worried or established with this condition is benefiting. We've also seen this to be the case now in the USA. Lots and lots of optometrists particularly are, you know, providing this, if you like, first line of eye care provision, and in collaboration with the medical ophthalmologist, people are understanding the benefits of early intervention, targeted and safe supplementation, and I hope the same for the UK and many other countries across the world. They can see what's happened in other countries and understand and look at the science and translate that. I think that's the biggest challenge that I see as a scientist. The length of time it takes to take a scientific discovery and translate it into clinical benefit and clinical practice is far too long. I think it's on average 15 years. And we must shorten that time. And indeed, my own network, the BON, the Brain and Ocular Nutrition Group, which again developed in collaboration with my late friend, Dr. Alan Howard, developed in Cambridge, UK, of course, now past 10 years old. We're very happy to have this BON network, Brain and Ocular Nutrition Network. And us as scientists, one of our goals is to continue to conduct science, of course, but to disseminate that, such as having conversations like you and I are doing, but also hopefully impact on policy and healthcare systems in a way that we can really help the most important person in this equation, which is the patient.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the issue of the relevance to brain health, and we will discuss that in our next conversation. But also it goes beyond brain health, doesn't it? Because the role of carotenoids in cardiovascular disease, for example, is probably very important. And there may well be scope for investigations there as well.
No, you again correct, Tony. I'm very happy to say I have a publication coming out in the coming weeks, in collaboration with a wonderful scientist, Dr. Nicole Stringham, and Dr. Marina Green, other scientists here at the centre here at Nutrition Research Centre Ireland. And in that paper, we've demonstrated that by simply supplementing with the macular pigments lutein, zeaxanthin and mesozeaxanthin, we used the 10-10-2 formula there from Industrial Organica. Not only were we able to systemically, so within the blood, reduce known important measures of inflammation like TNF alpha, IL-1 beta. These are essentially the kind of inflammatory markers that are lit up when somebody is unwell or sick or, you know, on a journey of risk in that regard. But this paper, and from a novelty perspective, actually shows very interesting, Tony, that we can impact positively downstream of that. So if you think of the blood system, And if you think of someone who's slightly unhealthy even, they may have elevated LDL levels. Okay, you've heard of the bad cholesterol, if you like. And what happens, that bad cholesterol, is it becomes oxidized. And what the body tries to do is it releases the macrophages to kind of gobble up and clean up the problem that is. But if the system becomes compromised and the oxidized LDL, it produces what we call a foam cell, so it kind of puffs out, and then the cleaning system doesn't work. What happens is the body responds and it produces kind of like a calcium over that, and that's where plaques come from. So you're absolutely right, Tony. You know, all the benefits that we've seen in the eye, from the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory and optical benefits, and we'll talk about the brain, as you say, later. This stems from the mechanisms whereby these carotenoids are doing so much more for us. So I think while we've 2 decades of, you know, well-established peer-reviewed scientific papers, we're probably only at the beginning in terms of our understanding of what these carotenoids can do for human health. The good news about these carotenoids, unlike maybe other interventions, I can tell you and your listeners and viewers that they really are an indicator of good health. And I like to start there. Put simply, the patients and the participants in our trials from over 2 decades, I think at last count we've worked with over 46,000 people where we've measured carotenoids now. Quite simply, those individuals that are healthy, that have appropriate and high levels of carotenoids, are healthy across all systems. They're just healthier individuals. They're at lower risk of macular degeneration, neurodegenerative diseases, and cardiometabolic risks. So yeah, a lot more to do in cardiometabolic disease, but for sure it's something that we're excited about for the future.
Yep. So that would be a good point at which to end and to look forward to the discussion that we're going to have next week. But as usual, there will be some text underneath this video image on the screen, and then some web links to various useful sources. So thank you very much, Don Nolan in Waterford, for talking to me, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Tony. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.